It was almost midnight when the cell phone vibrated under my pillow. My son Marcus, an FBI special agent, was on the other end with a voice I had never heard from him before, clipped, urgent, genuinely terrified. "Mom, turn off all the lights right now. Go to the attic, lock the door, and don't make a sound. And for the love of God, don't let your daughter and her husband know you're awake." I didn't ask why. I just obeyed. And what I saw shortly after destroyed everything I thought I knew about my own family. But before I continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and drop a comment below. Where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. My name is Beverly Winston. I am 68 years old. For almost 4 decades, I was a public high school literature teacher in the Midwest, in a small town called Galena, Illinois, one of those places where everyone knows everyone and nobody forgets the names of the people who pass through their lives. I taught hundreds of kids how to read, how to interpret, how to find the truth hidden between the lines of a text. I taught them that the most important stories are rarely written plainly, that you have to pay attention to what goes unsaid. I never imagined that one day I need to use that exact skill to save my own life inside my own home. I've lived my whole life in a simple but soul-filled house in the Heritage Hill district. A house that my husband Arthur and I bought when we were young and in love, when life felt like a promise being kept with every sunrise. We painted the walls together, fixed up the yard, planted the rose bushes that still bloom every June without anyone asking them to. We raised 2 kids within those walls, Marcus and Abigail. Marcus left home early. He got into law enforcement young, studied hard, and climbed the ranks until he made it to the FBI. Today he works in Washington, D.C., dealing with cases he can never tell me about in detail, but I know they're serious because I see the exhaustion in his eyes when he visits. He's a reserved man, not much of a talker, but with a massive heart. He always called on Wednesday nights, without fail, even if just to tell me he was okay. Abigail stayed closer to home. She married Bradley Preston, a middle-aged man with a smile that was a bit too wide and words always right on the tip of his tongue. He introduced himself as a financial advisor, always well-dressed, always with a ready answer for any question. They seemed like a well-established, well-adjusted couple. That word, seemed, carries a weight I only learned to feel when it was already too late. Arthur died a year and 2 months ago. Lung cancer. It was too fast for us to even say a proper goodbye. One day he was sitting on the porch drinking coffee and talking to me about the news in the paper, and 3 months later I was standing next to a hastily chosen casket, holding Marcus's hand tightly enough to hurt us both from so much pain. The house felt enormous after that. Every room turned into a sort of museum. His chair at the head of the table where I kept laying out the placemat but never used again. The radio he left tuned to a classic country music station. His slippers still in the same corner of the bedroom, exactly where he left them the last time he took them off. I moved among these objects like I was walking on eggshells, afraid of breaking what was left of him within those walls. It was in this moment of absolute fragility that Abigail showed up with the proposal. She came over on a Sunday afternoon, with Bradley by her side, both wearing that expression of someone about to do a huge favor that nobody asked for. We sat in the living room and she took my hand, looking into my eyes with a tenderness that I still believed was real, that I still needed to believe was real. The pitch was simple: they would move in here to keep me company, help me with the bills, and take care of the house that had gotten way too big for me alone. Their lease was up anyway. It made sense for everyone, she said. I said yes without thinking twice. How could I not? She was my daughter. She was my family. And I was so completely alone that even the sound of her footsteps through the house would have felt like an immense relief. They moved in 2 weeks later. At first, I admit, it was genuinely nice. The house came back to life. There was fresh coffee brewed in the morning, conversation at dinner, the feeling that I was no longer drowning in that deafening silence. Bradley took care of the yard without me asking. Abigail efficiently organized my bills. They asked if I was okay, if I had slept well, if I needed anything. Everything seemed perfect. But perfect has an expiration date when it's built on a lie. The first strange thing was a white pill Abigail brought me on the 3rd night. She placed it in the palm of my hand with a glass of water and a smile as smooth as honey. The doctor prescribed it, Mom. It's for stress and to help you sleep. It works wonders. I didn't remember going to any doctor recently. I didn't remember any appointment, any prescription. But she seemed so sure, so calm, so completely normal, that I swallowed the pill without questioning it. Over the following weeks, I started noticing my head felt different, heavy. Thoughts arrived slowly, as if they had to push through a thick layer of cotton before reaching me. I would walk into a room and forget what I went in there for. I'd start telling a story and lose my train of thought mid-sentence. My reading, which had always been the easiest thing in the world for me, turned into a chore. I'd read the same page 3 times and retain nothing. I thought it was my age. I thought it was the grief. I thought Arthur was pulling me with him, little by little, without me noticing. But deep down, in that dark place where we hide the things we don't yet have the courage to name, something told me it wasn't either of those things. There are things we ignore not because we're naive, but because the love we feel for a person makes us want to believe the best in them until the very end. I wanted to believe in Abigail. I needed to believe. She was my daughter, the piece of me that stayed closest, the little girl I had raised with so much care. So I saw the red flags and chose not to see them. Until my own body forced me to stop pretending everything was fine. I started having nightmares that were too much of a nightmare to just be dreams. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with the physical sensation that the bedroom was full of people, of presences, of eyes watching me. One time, I got up to go to the bathroom, and when I walked past the bedroom door, I saw Arthur standing in the hallway. In his pajamas, the same ones he wore in the hospital. Looking at me with an expression he never wore in life, serious, tense, as if he was trying to warn me about something urgent that I couldn't quite hear. When I turned on the light, nobody was there. But the chills lingered for the rest of the night. Abigail found me sitting on the edge of the bed, confused, in a cold sweat. She put her hand on my shoulder with all the gentleness in the world. "Mom, nightmares again. It's the grief processing, it's normal. That's why you need the meds and rest. The doctor said this would happen." And I agreed. Because what terrified me most in that moment was the idea of losing my mind completely. But on a Tuesday morning, when Abigail and Bradley had left for work, I was looking for a notebook in the living room desk. That desk had been mine since I retired, where I used to grade students' papers and write handwritten letters to friends out of state. But Bradley had taken it over in recent months, turning that space into his private home office. The door was always shut. That morning, it was cracked open. I went in. I didn't intend to snoop. I just wanted my notebook. But in a drawer that wasn't pushed all the way shut, there was a thin folder with a handwritten label in Bradley's neat handwriting, "Beverly's documents." I opened it with hands that were already starting to shake before I even understood why. Inside, there was a psychiatric evaluation form with my name already filled out at the top. Full name, social security number, date of birth, address. And below, in a diagnosis field, words that knocked the wind out of me: early stage senile dementia, erratic behavior, progressive inability to manage own life and finances. The name of a facility I had never heard of, New Dawn Wellness Clinic, specializing in elderly cognitive health. And a date penciled in the top corner of the page, 3 days from that moment. I stood there staring at it for an amount of time I can't measure. Then my hand stopped shaking. Not because I had calmed down, but because rage took the place of fear, and rage, unlike fear, leaves no room for trembling. I put the form back exactly as it was, closed the drawer, and walked out of the room slowly, as if nothing had happened. I went back to the kitchen, put the kettle on the stove, sat in Arthur's chair at the head of the table, and stared at the wall for a long time. That night, when Abigail brought me the white pill, I placed it on my tongue, brought the glass to my mouth, and didn't swallow. I let the water run down my throat and kept the pill tucked under my tongue, waiting for her to say goodnight and leave the room. As soon as the door clicked shut, I ran to the bathroom. I dissolved the pill in a glass with a little water. The water turned cloudy, grayish, with a residue that stuck to the glass like clay sediment. I grabbed an emergency tablet I kept on the shelf and did the same test in a second glass. That one fizzed lightly, turned pale orange, and dissolved clean. The difference was night and day. Vitamins don't leave gray sludge. That was not a vitamin, not by a long shot. I went up to the attic that very night. The attic was my storage space for old books, binders, and 40 years of teaching materials I never had the heart to throw away. It was also the only place in the house without a camera, because Bradley had installed cameras in every other room claiming they were for my safety. Camera in the living room, in the hallway, in the kitchen, in the downstairs half-bath. But not in the attic. He said I rarely went up there anyway. He was right. But starting that night, the attic became my headquarters. I opened my old laptop stored in a box with old students' notebooks and typed with fingers still slightly trembling, symptoms of hallucinations caused by medication in the elderly. The results that popped up froze me instantly. Sedatives. Benzodiazepines. Drugs that cause exactly what I was feeling: confusion, disorientation, vivid nightmares, memory loss, the feeling of moving underwater. Administered continuously and without real medical need, they were capable of making a healthy person look mentally ill in a matter of weeks. It was exactly what was happening to me. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark among the boxes of books, the smell of old paper holding me like a real embrace in a world that had become entirely fake. And I made the most important decision of my life: I wasn't going to let them do this. There are kinds of loneliness that most people will never understand because they've never lived them. The loneliness of being alone because you have nobody is heavy. But the loneliness of being surrounded by people and realizing none of them are who they seem to be, that is the cruelest of all. Because you can't even cry properly. Because surrounding you are the very people responsible for your pain, watching you, waiting, smiling, asking if you want a refill on your coffee. That's how I spent the days following that discovery. Pretending to take the pills. Pretending to be confused. Letting Bradley finish my sentences when I seemed unable to find the right words. Letting Abigail call me sweetie with that slow, sugary voice, like someone talking to a toddler who needs everything explained slowly. Letting them both believe their little protocol was working perfectly. Underneath all that facade, I was more awake and more alert than at any point in my life. I watched everything. The phone calls Bradley made in the office with the door closed, always in the morning, always sounding like he was handling serious business. The way Abigail deflected any conversation that touched on money, documents, or inheritance, always with a soft smile and a change of subject so smooth you almost missed the maneuver. The fact that my mail, which used to come straight to the mailbox by the gate, now passed through her hands first before getting to me. And sometimes, it didn't get to me at all. One afternoon, my neighbor Shirley showed up at the door with a fresh homemade peach cobbler. She and I have known each other for over 30 years, since our kids used to play together on the dirt road before it was paved. Shirley is one of those women who looks into your eyes and sees way more than you'd like to show. A retired ER nurse by calling, not just by profession. She spent 30 years in an emergency room. Nothing gets past her. Abigail greeted her at the door with a massive smile and called me over, sounding like she was doing me a favor. We sat on the porch for 10 minutes, the amount of time Abigail deemed sufficient before coming up with some excuse to wrap up the visit. But it was 10 minutes enough for Shirley to look me up and down, notice the sluggishness in my movements, the dullness in my eyes, and whisper while Abigail answered her phone inside, "Beverly, are you really okay? Because you don't seem like yourself." I opened my mouth to say I was fine. But her gaze was so direct, so free of judgment, so completely the type that doesn't accept a lie, that the automatic response just didn't come out. I looked at the rose bushes Arthur planted, the red blooms stubbornly opening despite the neglect, and said in a very low voice, "No, Shirley. I'm not." She squeezed my hand hard. Before leaving, she slipped a folded little note up my sleeve with the discreet sleight of hand of someone who had done this her whole life in hospital corridors. The note had her cell phone number and 3 words in blue ink, "You can call." Bradley noticed the visit, of course. That night at dinner, he made a casual comment about how outsiders sometimes accidentally mess with the heads of the elderly who are already fragile from grief, planting unnecessary doubts, creating anxiety where there shouldn't be any. He didn't look at me while he spoke, but I knew exactly who those words were meant for. It was the following week that I found the contracts. Bradley had left early and Abigail was in the shower. I walked past the living room and the office door was cracked open, which was rare. I went in just to grab a pen I knew I had left on the desk before they moved in. But in a drawer that wasn't fully closed, there was a thicker folder, bearing the name of a law firm I had never seen before. Inside, 2 documents that made my stomach churn. The first was a comprehensive power of attorney granting Bradley and Abigail full, irrevocable control over all my assets, my bank accounts, my investments, and my medical decisions. The second was a draft of a real estate sales contract for the house, already filled out with the property details, the agreed purchase price, and the buyer's name. The only thing missing was my signature on the bottom 2 lines. And in the margin of the POA, written in pencil in Bradley's handwriting, "Sign after Tuesday's eval." I photographed every page with the prepaid burner phone Marcus had given me months ago, which I had been carrying in my bra ever since I found that first form. I put everything back exactly as it was. I went back to the kitchen, put water on to boil, and sat down to have a cup of tea I wasn't going to be able to drink. My heart raced for hours. But my expression remained as calm as stone. Tuesday. The evaluation was Tuesday. It meant a doctor would come examine me, sign a report saying I was unfit to care for myself, and with that piece of paper, they could force any signature or bypass mine entirely. I would be locked up in the New Dawn Wellness Clinic while the house and my life savings vanished. Today was Saturday. I had 3 days. That night, I went up to the attic and called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring, as if he was waiting, as if he knew. I told him everything in quick whispers, sitting in the dark among the boxes of books, the burner phone pressed to my ear and my other hand holding my knee to stop the shaking. The pills. The cameras. The clinic form. The contracts. The POA. The evaluation scheduled for Tuesday with a signing date right after. When I finished, there were a few seconds of silence. The kind of silence from someone processing information they already suspected but still hurts to hear confirmed. Then Marcus spoke with a voice I instantly recognized. It wasn't my son's voice. It was the investigator's voice. Calm, precise, professional. "Mom, I need to tell you something I didn't tell you before because I didn't want to scare you until I was sure. I've been investigating Bradley for 2 months. The floor seemed to shift beneath me even though I was sitting down. Bradley Preston wasn't just an opportunistic husband who had married into my family. According to Marcus, there were at least 2 documented prior cases with the exact same modus operandi. Bradley would infiltrate a family through a relationship of trust, move into the home of an elderly person with assets, begin the isolation process, compromise the victim's lucidity with unprescribed medication, and when the person was sufficiently confused and dependent, he'd use documents signed in that state to seize their property. In one of the previous cases down in Florida, the victim, a 74-year-old retiree with a ranch and a hefty savings account, died inside a private clinic 6 months after being committed. The case was closed due to lack of evidence. Bradley walked away untouched. I tasted iron in my mouth. Marcus explained that there was a jurisdictional conflict preventing him from officially leading the investigation because he was an immediate family member of the victim. The rules were clear and strict on that. But he was working in tandem with Detective Sarah Jenkins, a seasoned investigator who was building the case with all the necessary caution. The problem was they needed at least another 8 to 10 days to get the judicial warrants required to move in with the force of the law. 10 days. I had 3. He gave me instructions with the bluntness of someone who knows there's no time to sugarcoat things. Stay in the attic as much as possible without raising suspicion. Observe. Record any conversation or movement I could. Don't let Bradley or Abigail realize I was completely lucid, that I knew what was happening. And above all, do not let them take me to that evaluation unless he was there. Mom, he said before hanging up, and his voice became the son's again, not the investigator's. You are the smartest person I have ever known. You spent 40 years teaching people how to read between the lines. Use that now. You can do this. I stayed in the dark of the attic for a long time after the call dropped. I looked at the stack of books nearby, some with faded spines, some with bookmarks that were never removed. I grabbed one, without even looking at the title, and held it against my chest. I remembered Arthur telling me once that I was the most stubborn woman he had ever met, and that he thanked God for that every single day. In that moment, I understood what he meant. The next day, I got to work. The attic had, in a forgotten corner near the vent, a gap between the old floorboards. A thin crack, the kind wood naturally develops over the years as it contracts and expands with time and humidity. Arthur always said he was going to patch it up and never got around to it. Crouching over that crack, I had a surprisingly good angle of the living room below. I could see the couch, the coffee table, the entrance to the kitchen, and a piece of the street-facing window. And I could hear, when voices were loud enough. That afternoon, Bradley stayed in the living room making calls. I managed to catch parts of at least 3 of them. A name that kept repeating, Dr. Vance. A phrase clear enough for me to understand, she's reacting well to the protocol, right on schedule. And another, right at the end, Tuesday is confirmed, you can have the paperwork ready to sign on Wednesday. I needed more than fragments of conversations. I needed recorded proof, video and audio, the kind nobody can deny in a courtroom. I looked around the attic. There was an old digital camera of Arthur's, kept in a shoebox, that he used to use to record our road trips. I tested it. It worked. It had a video mode with a built-in mic and an SD card still inside. It wasn't high-tech gear, but it was what I had. I looked at the bookshelf on the wall in the main hallway, clearly visible from the living room. On the bottom shelf sat a large picture frame with our wedding photo, Arthur and I, both too young to know how good it would be and how much it would hurt. That photo had been there for years. Nobody really looked at it anymore. It was just part of the wall, part of the house. That was the spot. I worked for almost 2 hours with a level of focus I hadn't felt since the days I prepped major lesson plans, the kind that had to be perfect because the subject was hard and the kids would rely on every word. Using a pair of thin sewing scissors, I carved a small notch into the wooden frame of the picture, in the bottom right corner, from the inside. Just enough space to lodge the camera in, lens angled slightly outward, capturing what happened in front of it. The wedding photo remained intact, the 2 young faces smiling, oblivious to the future. From the outside, it was just a family portrait like any other. I placed the frame back on the hallway shelf, positioned for the best view of the living room, and told Abigail I was reorganizing old photos out of nostalgia. She didn't question it. Why would she? To her, I was a confused, docile old lady still processing grief who would soon be shipped off to a place where I wouldn't be a burden anymore. The camera captured the couch, the coffee table, part of the kitchen entryway, and a good chunk of the hallway. And the microphone, though small, worked really well in that enclosed, average-sized room. I did a test whispering from inside the hallway and heard my own voice playback with startling clarity. On that first night of surveillance, I sat in the attic with my laptop resting on my knees, connected via cable to the camera, watching the live feed with the volume low and wearing an old pair of headphones Marcus had left behind years ago. Bradley and Abigail sat on the couch around 9 p.m. with glasses of red wine. Relaxed. Speaking softly, but in a casual, domestic tone, without the caution of someone who suspects they're being watched. What I heard that night was like getting hit with a bucket of ice water that wakes you up completely, leaving no chance of ever going back to sleep. Bradley talked about Dr. Vance with the casual air of someone discussing a business partner. He mentioned figures, percentages, transfer timelines. He said the old lady was right on protocol and that, after Tuesday, it's just a matter of paperwork and patience. Abigail replied with a coldness that broke my heart in a way I didn't think was possible anymore, because I thought I was ready for whatever I was going to hear. But I wasn't. You are never prepared to hear your own daughter's voice treating your life like a business contract about to be terminated. And then she said, in a quiet moment between the two of them, like someone letting slip a thought she'd been holding back, "Sometimes I feel a twinge of guilt, you know? She is my mother." And Bradley replied, without pausing, without even lifting his eyes from his glass, "Everybody's got a mother, babe. Not everybody's got an inheritance." She laughed. A small, almost awkward laugh, but she laughed. I unplugged the headphones and stared at the attic wall for I don't know how long. The wedding photo was downstairs, doing its job in silence. Arthur looking at me from that picture with the smile I would have recognized in pitch black. I thought about him. I thought about how devastated and furious he would have been if he knew. I thought that maybe he did know, from wherever he was now, and that was why he had appeared in the hallway that night, trying to warn me in a way I hadn't yet been able to understand. I copied the video file to the burner phone and sent it to Marcus with a text, "It's recorded. Listen to this. Tuesday is their deadline." He texted back in under 10 minutes, "Mom, you are incredible. Hold out for 2 more days. Sarah is in the final stretch for the warrant. 2 days." I needed to hold out for 2 days. The next day, Monday, Bradley made a call in the office with the door carelessly left ajar. I heard it clearly enough to freeze my blood. "Dr. Vance, confirmed for tomorrow at 10 a.m.? Perfect. She'll be ready for you." I went to the attic and texted Marcus immediately. The reply was fast, "We're almost there. Don't let him take you to the evaluation unless I'm there first. By time whatever you do." By time. Right. That night, I faked taking the pills, walked down the stairs like always, said thank you for dinner, said goodnight with a smile that cost me everything I had, and went up to my room. I laid down. I waited for the silence to settle over the house. And then, at 2 a.m., I went back up to the attic and stayed awake until dawn preparing every detail of what I was going to do the next day. Dr. Vance arrived at 10 o'clock sharp on Tuesday, exactly as planned. He was a man in his late 50s, wearing a slightly wrinkled beige sports coat and holding a leather briefcase with both hands like a shield. He had a rehearsed politeness that I recognized instantly, the politeness of someone who learned that smiling opens doors but never actually needed to feel what the smile meant. He greeted Abigail with the familiarity of an old acquaintance, not the formality of a doctor stepping into a stranger's home for the first time. We sat in the living room. Bradley and Abigail positioned themselves in the corners like discreet sentinels. The doctor opened his briefcase, pulled out a clipboard with a pre-printed form, and started. Basic orientation questions: the year, the name of the president, the day of the week. I answered everything with the crisp clarity of a teacher used to speaking loudly and clearly in front of noisy classrooms. I saw the discomfort on his face, the hesitation of a man who expected to find a lost woman and instead found a woman standing her ground. But he had already been paid. The discomfort lasted mere seconds before he flipped to the next page. When he shifted his tone and started asking if I heard voices, if I felt I was being watched, if I woke up confused at night, I answered carefully. I let it slip that sometimes I dreamt of Arthur, that I felt his presence in the house. It was true. He jotted it down like it was exactly what he needed. The evaluation lasted 22 minutes. 22 minutes to sign away someone's destiny. The doctor stood up, shook my hand with fake cordiality, and followed Bradley and Abigail into the kitchen for a private chat. I walked up the stairs with the heavy steps of a tired old woman, grabbed the tablet in the attic, and watched the feed from the hallway camera. Dr. Vance signed the papers on my kitchen table, on the very same surface where Arthur and I drank coffee for 30 years. Bradley pulled an envelope from his pocket and handed it over without hesitation. The doctor opened it, checked the contents, closed it, and tucked it into his briefcase with the same professional smoothness he'd used to put away a business card. All recorded. With the date, time, video, and audio. As soon as the doctor left, I sent the file to Marcus with a text. He signed it. They set it for tomorrow morning. Get here before they do. The reply took longer than I wanted to wait. When it came, it read, "Mom, we hit a last-minute snag with the warrant. Sarah is sorting it out, but it might be delayed until later tomorrow. Can you stall them somehow?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I slipped the phone into my pocket, looked up at the attic ceiling, took a deep breath, and decided yes. I was going to buy time. And I was going to do it the only way a teacher knows how, by using every resource at my disposal, without wasting a thing. I went down to the garden before dark, under the guise of watering the plants. I left the flash drive with all the recordings tucked under the fern pot on the porch for Shirley to grab first thing in the morning. I texted her on the burner phone explaining what was going down and asking her to keep it safe. Her reply came 2 minutes later, "I'm right here. You can count on me." I slept very little that night, but I slept. I needed to be rested for what was coming. And when the first sounds of dawn began outside, I was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, ready. I was going to be ready. Just not the way they imagined. It was nearly 6 in the morning when I heard the rattle of the gate outside. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and peeked through the slit in the curtains, careful to stay hidden. A white van was pulling up in front of the house, with a logo I couldn't quite make out in the pre-dawn light. 2 men stepped out wearing paramedic uniforms, moving with the cold efficiency of guys who already know the drill before they arrive. Behind them, a dark sedan idled with the engine running. They were over an hour early. My heart hammered in my chest, but I didn't let it paralyze me. I grabbed the burner phone and shot Marcus a text with just 4 words, "They're here. In attic." Then I grabbed the tablet with the recordings, the backup flash drive I kept stashed inside an old Hemingway book on the attic shelf, and climbed the stairs in the dark, stepping on the outer edges of the steps so they wouldn't creak, just like I'd learned to do over these weeks of silent watch. From up there, I heard the front door click open. Bradley's voice, low and rushed. Abigail's, cold and direct as always. The heavy boots of the 2 men thudding against the hardwood floor. I heard Bradley say I was sleeping in the bedroom at the end of the hall, that they needed to be quick, that the neighbor on the right woke up early. I heard one of the men say he had a syringe prepped that would make me go quiet in seconds. A syringe. Quiet in seconds. It wasn't a medical transport. It was a kidnapping with signed paperwork. I stood up from my crouch. I walked to the attic door. I pushed it open slowly and stood right in the doorway, looking down the hall as it started filling with the morning light pouring in through the windows. The 2 men were stepping out of my bedroom, looking confused that they hadn't found me in bed. Bradley was right behind them, his face tight with impatience. Abigail stood at the end of the hall, her arms crossed over her chest. When they saw me standing in the attic doorway, tablet tucked under my arm and my eyes wide awake, the silence that dropped was the kind that makes the walls feel heavy. "Mom." Abigail's voice broke first. It wavered, revealing a crack she couldn't hide. "You're awake." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence do the work for a few more seconds, the same way I used to do in the classroom when I wanted the whole room to pay attention at once. Then I spoke, in a voice that shocked even me. Firm. Clear. Not a single tremor. "I recorded everything." Bradley's face morphed. The mask slipped for a split second before he scrambled to pull it back up. One of the uniformed men took an instinctive half-step backward. Abigail stood perfectly still. I turned on the tablet and hit play on the recording. Dr. Vance's voice echoed through the hallway with clinical clarity as he signed committal papers for a woman who had answered every cognitive test with flawless precision. Then Bradley's voice handing over the envelope. Then Abigail's own voice saying she felt a twinge of guilt because I was her mother, and Bradley's reply about the inheritance, followed by her laugh. One of the men in uniform turned to the other, his face stripped of any professionalism. "I didn't sign up for this, man. I was hired for a private medical transport." The other nodded without a word. Bradley lunged toward me, arm outstretched. "Give me that right now." The voice that sliced through the air wasn't mine. It came from below, from the front entrance of the house, booming and leaving absolutely zero room for debate. "FBI. Nobody move." Footsteps pounded up the stairs, fast and disciplined. Marcus crested the landing first, badge in his right hand, wearing a look I had never seen on him in his entire life. Right behind him was Detective Sarah Jenkins, a woman in her 40s whose eyes swept the entire hallway in a fraction of a second, missing nothing. 2 uniformed local cops flanked the rear. Marcus looked at me first, just me, and the investigator vanished for a second to leave space for the son. "Mom, are you okay?" I swallowed hard. "I'm fine. And I've got everything right here." What happened over the next few hours was simultaneously the most chaotic and the strangest moment of my life. Chaotic because there were way too many people in that house, voices overlapping, cuffs clicking, papers being flashed, questions being shot in multiple directions at once. Strange because, after Marcus put his hand on my shoulder and asked if I was okay, something inside me just stopped racing. Like when you hold your breath for too long and finally get to exhale. Bradley and Abigail were hauled off in separate squad cars. The 2 men in uniform were detained for questioning and immediately cooperated, stating they had been hired as a private medical transport, blind to the reality of the situation. Dr. Vance was arrested that very morning at his practice, when Detective Jenkins rolled in with the warrant and the recordings I'd saved. The envelope of cash was still sitting in his desk drawer, right where he'd tossed it the afternoon before. I spent the next 2 days giving formal statements. I brought in all the files, all the flash drives, all the photos of the documents, all the audio and video logs. The district attorney who reviewed the evidence sat in silence for a long time, just staring at the neatly organized folders on his desk. Then he said it was the most ironclad body of evidence he'd ever seen handed over directly by a victim, without a middleman. I smiled on the inside, thinking, 40 years of prepping lesson plans teaches you how to organize anything. The investigation that blew open was bigger than I expected. Dr. Vance had signed, over the last 4 years, at least 21 involuntary committal orders for seniors who had absolutely no real diagnosis of incapacitation. All of them had substantial assets. All of them had been systematically isolated from relatives who might raise hell. The New Dawn Wellness Clinic was a partner in the racket, taking a fixed cut of each patient's estate over their months of treatment. The lawyer who drafted up the powers of attorney was arrested 2 weeks later. The accountant who washed the money followed a week after that. 2 of the previous victims had died inside the facility. The coroner's report cited natural causes. Detective Jenkins promised those deaths were being reopened as top priority homicides. The trial came 7 months later. On sentencing day, the courthouse hallway was packed. Shirley came with me and stayed by my side the whole time, her hand over mine just like on the porch that afternoon with the peach cobbler, back when everything was just starting to unravel. Marcus stood on my other side. Detective Jenkins, who had become a sort of ally beyond the call of duty, gave me a nod from across the room, a gesture that was equal parts greeting and deep respect. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up from my chair on legs slightly wobblier than I would have liked. I walked to the podium slowly. I stared at Abigail for a long, heavy moment. She couldn't hold my gaze. Then I looked at the judge and began. I stated that my name was Beverly Winston, that I was 68 years old, that I was not old, not senile, and certainly not incompetent. That I was a woman who had taught literature for 40 years and knew how to tell the difference between what a story says and what it hides. That what happened to me wasn't an accident, nor a coincidence, nor the overreaction of a confused old lady. It was a premeditated crime that took months of planning and used my grief as a Trojan horse. I said I wasn't up there just for me. I was up there for every single one of the 21 other people who were fed into that machine. For the 2 who never made it out of that clinic alive. For all the seniors who are treated like an inconvenience, a burden, a bank account to be raided before the clock runs out. I said that being a senior citizen is not a synonym for being defenseless. That experience, patience, and attention are weapons that no injection can completely strip away from someone who spent a lifetime sharpening them. The judge sentenced Bradley to 16 years for fraud, criminal conspiracy, false imprisonment, and elder abuse. Dr. Vance got 14 years and had his medical license permanently revoked. The brass at the New Dawn Wellness Clinic got sentences ranging from 8 to 12 years. Abigail, being an immediate family member who played a central role in isolating the victim, got 9 years, with the possibility of a halfway house down the line provided she continuously cooperated with the investigation into the other cases. When the gavel banged, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt the massive weight of a thing that had finally been called exactly what it was. The house was sold 3 months later. I couldn't sleep inside those walls anymore, not with all that history soaked into the floorboards. A young family bought it, a couple with 2 little kids who looked at the rooms with that wide-eyed excitement of people just starting out. Before I handed over the keys, I walked through the yard, rested my hands on Arthur's rose bushes, and stood there for a few minutes that required absolutely no words. I moved into a smaller apartment, closer to Marcus. One of the bedrooms became my reading room and workspace, packed with my books and the photos I chose to keep. The wedding picture sits on the windowsill, right where the afternoon sun hits it every single day. I kept up with Shirley every week, grabbing coffee and catching up just like we always did. I started volunteering at the neighborhood community center, teaching adult literacy to people who never got the chance to learn before. I started speaking at support groups, at community halls, anywhere that would have me, telling them exactly what happened to me. I explained the red flags, stating point blank that elder abuse is real, that it happens under your own roof, and that the people doing it rarely look like monsters. One day, after one of those talks, a 71-year-old woman approached me. She told me her daughter's husband had started managing her finances without asking, that her daughter had moved into her house without her ever really agreeing to it, that she was taking some pills and didn't know what they were for, that she was feeling confused, sluggish, different, and that she was ashamed to speak up because she didn't want to sound like she was accusing her own flesh and blood without proof. I took her hands in mine and told her the exact thing I needed someone to tell me back then: you are not overreacting. You are not confused. You are not too old to trust your own eyes. You are right. And you need to call Marcus. She cried. So did I. I am 68 years old. I am not old. I am not weak. I am not easy to fool. I am a teacher who spent her entire life showing kids that the most important stories are hidden between the lines, and that whoever learns to read between the lines is never truly defenseless. And the most important lesson I learned over all these months is one I will keep teaching as long as I have a voice: when something doesn't make sense, do not blindly accept the explanation you are given. Ask again. Look closer. Find someone you trust who has absolutely zero stake in what you own. And if you have to, use the burner phone your son hid in your sewing kit because he knew, long before you did, that one day you were going to need it. Now, if you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe, and let me know in the comments, which part made your jaw drop. Oh, and don't forget to become a channel member for access to exclusive videos I don't post here. I'll see you there.